Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. As you can tell, we're obviously not at the beach. I am currently sat in my workshop, basically just making a few rigs, topping out a rig wallet, sorting out my fishing gear ready for my next few sessions. So I've had a few people message me recently about the Dongle rig, a few different things like it's not really working for them, they're missing bites and a few other things. So I thought I'd do an updated video. And this video is purely more so just of baiting up. I got a few different baits. I got some squid, crab, sand eel, bluey and mackerel to show you how I bait up a few different things. So hopefully it helps a few of you. One thing I will say from my last video, as you can probably tell, nothing has changed in the way I tie it up, because in my opinion it doesn't need to be changed. The reason it is so effective is because it's so simple, obviously, as well as obviously a circle hook has a specific purpose of obviously hooking a fish in the corner of the mouth. I have seen a few things done differently with it. The one thing I have seen that I really wouldn't recommend is, well, I tied one up to show you, is they tied a clip onto their hook link and clipped the hook on. Now I just look at that and I just instantly get put off by it. It just doesn't look right. It just doesn't sit right. It's just not good. Their reason for it was so when you're reeling in and your hook is bumping along the bottom, it doesn't catch. So if it catches and your hook's blunt, you can just unclip the hook and clip a new one back on. But the point has already curled in on the circle, so it's not going to catch. That's basically another major advantage of a circle. You're not going to lose gear, or your hook's not going to catch to lose gear because it's already curled in. So J hooks, if you're going to do it, J hooks are one for it, but I don't know why they haven't done it with that. But it's not neat, is it? It just doesn't look right. So basically the best thing for that setup is to get it and just throw it out the way because it's no good. What you want to do is just tie a perfection loop on and tie a braided dongle. Don't overcomplicate it, don't overthink it. It works well because it's so simple. So one thing I will say, I've had a few people say to me that it doesn't unclip in the cast, as well as putting a J hook on the actual whatever bait clip you're using, whether it's an imp or splashdown or bait clip, whatever. I think that is purely because I find, well, because obviously braid is technically string, so I think it sort of holds into a bait clip a little bit better, so it takes a little bit more to come off than metal on plastic, because it's two solid materials against each other. So I can imagine that the loop on the dongle will actually like mold into a hook a bit better, say like an imp. I can imagine that the braid will sort of mold into it and hold itself there a bit more. But a big reason why rigs don't unclip is when you're casting out, say that you got a side on wind and you're casting out and the rig's not landing dead straight down. So sometimes a heavier lead, and if you got a strong side on wind, cast as high as you can. So when it comes up high, and then obviously as it's declining down towards the surface, it hits it more dead on straight than it does landing on its side, which is why imps and splashdowns work better, because they work on impact rather than you relying on slack in the line. So obviously if you're fishing on side on wind and you cast into strong tide, you're not really giving your rig a chance for it to go slack for your hook to come off. So that's a big play, I think, on why rigs don't unclip, which I think is probably the biggest, what is the only reason actually, to be honest. So yeah, with all that said, I think it's now time to get baiting up. So yeah, I will now show you how I bait up the dongle rig. Right, so the first bait I will show you how I bait them up is crab. Now crab is not a big bait. I don't fish a big crab bait. I would never use more than one crab. And the actual dongle itself is really short, as you can see there against my hand. It's a very short dongle. because typically, obviously it's mainly hounds, and we all know hounds haven't really got a big mouth at all. So, and when you're fishing in tide, you're fishing for a fish, it quickly picks up your bait and moves off with it. You don't want a big bait because you want it to get it in their mouth and get that hook in, and as they turn to move off, it hooks them. So the first thing I do, obviously you got to peel them down. That one's already peeled. The next thing I do is basically, down the centre of the crab, I basically cut it in half. There's still a bit of shedding, but oh well. And then I've showed them in a lot of my videos, I use just a knitted needle as a baiting needle. There are a few different ones on the market. But the first thing I do is thread one half of it on, and then I basically just loosely elasticate around that one, and then I basically, same with all my baits, I put quite a bit around the tip of it on the one end, slide it off slightly, and then I'll hook the crab, hook the hook through the top part, and then I'll lay the dongle down the length of it, and then elasticate that just on the ends to hold it in place. Then I'll get the other half, even then it's quite a big bait, it's quite a big crab really, and then elasticate that other half back on, and that is basically it. Now I do tend to trim off any little bits sticking out, so that's basically how I bait up a crab. Now I like short stumpy baits. I don't like them, because I first started by sort of snipping it halfway up and then opening it up and then putting on the dongle that way, but it's quite a long bait. Like I said, hounds, they quick move in, grab your bait and move off. So that is perfect bait really. Same, I bait up crab for hounds and cod, bass, whatever you're fishing for, that's how I do it. And you can add bits, add like squid to it or whatever, but that is how I do crab. Right, so next up is the sand eels. Now, a lot of people prefer big sand eel or the launce. They all work, they all catch fish, but I've never been a massive fan of the launce. I do find that smaller eels do work better, because round Barry, like at the minute, there's a lot of sand eel about, and they are all tiny. There's not any big ones in amongst them, so the fish are used to feeding on small sand eel, so it sort of makes sense to sort of like match the hatch kind of thing. So it's a really simple with the sand eel. I just go ahead and tail them, obviously according to the size of the dongle I'm using. Out of all baits, sand eel is one I really don't like using big baits with, because there are fish out there feeding on them. Like say you're fishing on the sand spit down at Lavernock for the blondes, the blondes are there feeding on the sand eel, so they're used to picking off small baits. So matching the hatch really does work the trick down there. So I basically go ahead and put a little bit of elastic around the tip of it, have the one on the needle, and then I just put my hook through it, and then I slide the sand eel at the other end, so I can basically work on that end of it. I put the dongle up against the eel, just put a little bit on the one end just to hold it down flat, and I lay another reel up against it. If they're slightly bigger, I'll just use one, but these are quite small, so I'll chuck two on. And then I'll put a little bit going down the length of the eel, but very little. And then I'll put quite a bit on the top just to hold it on, and same with the bottom. And slide it off. Now you may be thinking that's virtually no elastic on that, but when that fish comes to pick it up and feels it, it's a lot more natural, because if you mummify it out of elastic and put it on really tight, it's just not natural. And I personally think the fish do notice myself, and especially when you're casting a sand eel into water where the fish are feeding on sand eel, you want it as natural as possible. So that's basically how I bait up my sand eel. Now you can also put a bit of squid up against it, a bit of mackerel, bluey or whatever, but that's just basically how I do my sand eel baits. Next up is the good old mackerel. I prefer, myself, I prefer the smaller ones, the joey mackerel. But obviously if I can't get hold of any, I will use the bigger ones. I prefer the small ones because if I just take a fillet off of this one now, I'll explain to you why. The reason I prefer the smaller ones then is, so when you fillet that, it's quite a thin fillet, and when you're not fishing big baits, especially when you're fishing, say you're fishing for whiting and using really small hooks, when using a really thick fillet, by the time you cut into strips, it ends up mushing slightly, so you've got to cut a little bit of the meat off it just to thin it down a bit. So that's why joeys are really good for that. What I do, I fillet the mackerel, and when you are cutting it, don't cut it skin side up, because what you'll find, if it's completely defrosted and you haven't got the sharpest knife, as you go to cut it, you'll mush the meat underneath the skin before you actually cut through the skin. Because you will notice the mackerel has got like quite a tough little film on it. So basically skin side down, take a slice. Let's see if you can see that little film holding it together there. And then I'll cut them 2 fillets, them strips, down to the same size as my dongle again. You've ended up with basically just 4 little strips. Now I thread one on the dongle. Same again, quite a bit of elastic around the one end. And that is basically just so it gives the circle hook something to bite into, not pull off. I'll show you, because I've had a few people say that their baits pull off when you have the bite and they miss the fish, but that is, I just don't think it's being held on properly. I'll show you now how hard it is to pull it off if you do it like this. And the other good thing with putting the dongle against the back, where you got the knot to the loop, if you put elastic around the tip through the knot, like a little alongside it, the elastic will actually dig into the knot, and obviously make it harder for a fish to pull it off. Go up it again, and then I just basically add the other strips to that. I put one on the back, so over the dongle, elasticate that on, and you can go ahead and put another one on. What I can do actually, I do like to put some of them skin side down, because I just think it just sends out a bit of scent quicker. And if there is any little tiny fish ripping at it, it's just going to attract the bigger stuff in. Like I said again, not too much elastic, and that is perfect mackerel bait there. And another good thing with doing it in strips and adding to it is the dongle ends up through the center of the bait, which aids for casting, and I think it just sits neater myself and looks neater as well. So that's how I do my mackerel. Bluey exactly the same. Bluey's the same, no different. And you don't need to go like that. Is, you know, it is quite a small bait, but you don't need to go anything bigger really. Even for fishing for big blonde rays and stuff, you don't need to really. So that's the mackerel. Next up, I'll show you how I do my sort of a cocktail bait with a bit of bluey and squid. So if I take off a fillet of the bluey, it's doing too sharp in this knife, it's getting quite blunt. So with the fillet, the bluey and the squid, same again, cut some bait down to the length of the dongle. I do that with the bluey, just cut a little bit off that to narrow it down slightly. And then if I use the scissors, I just basically open up the squid, take the head and guts out, like so. And then I just lay the bit of bluey up against it and cut that the same length. And then take about half of that mantle, more than enough. And then I slide the piece of bluey up the dongle, up the needle, and then same again. Crop it around the one end. And we all know that bluey is very soft bait, same as sardines and herring, it's very soft. so it pays to put a little bit more elastic around the tip. And then I lay the dongle back down the sort of the back of the bait. A bit too much on there. Trim that back. And then same as the rest of the baits, a little bit on the end. And then I lay the squid on the back, sort of hiding the dongle. Not hiding it as if the fish are going to see it and get put off, but sort of just to cover it. Then I elasticate over the end. Same again, just a little bit going up the middle, and then quite a bit on the tip. And that's how I do my cocktail baits. And obviously you can add anything to it, whatever you're fishing for, whatever bait you're using. And the good thing with a nice streamlined small bait like that is it's just going to sit better in the tide. Don't get me wrong, I do change my baits quite often. I normally change my baits every, like, I don't know, 15-20 minutes. Whereas if you're using quite a big bait, like you'll see some people using a whole fillet mackerel and a whole squid. Obviously you can leave that up there for like an hour. It's not really going to, like, it's surprising. You might have found yourself, you reel in your bait after like 20 minutes or so, you take it off, throw it in a rock pool, and you'll see all the oils coming out of the bluey or mackerel or whatever. So it's surprising how long a bait will last for. It's quite deceiving, to be honest. So yeah, that is my cocktail of bluey and squid. Right, so last up is, well, the best till last I should say, is the squid. Cannot beat squid. I don't like going fishing without it, to be honest. This, as we all know, it's one of them baits that will literally just catch anything that's swimming. It's really good. Catch you anything, anywhere. What I do with the squid though, I bait up slightly differently to the rest. I basically, where at the top of the squid, where the like the backbone, like that bit of plasticky thing, runs at the top, I basically just put a slit going up there, and up the length of the squid, grab the backbone out, and open it up, and I get all the basically guts out, and the head. Should just pull the head and all, just pull out, like so. And that's what I start with. And I've seen people throw it in the past, and don't get why you would throw that, because that's where all the scent is really on the squid. So I just basically start by just laying it up against the dongle, the needle, and then elasticate around the head. Now with the guts in the squid, I do put quite a bit of elastic just purely because it's so soft. So I leave that, you can see it's all just falling off there, but it's all good stuff. So I do put quite a bit to start it off, just to make sure it's all held on. Even though it's all going to be covered, as you'll see in a minute. And then I get the mantle. I'll just do a little bit off the end. And then same again, just cut it to length, the same as the dongle. Then I normally cut that in 3 pieces. And then I lay them all down onto the bait there. Like I said, not much elastic. Then I just put that going right around the bait. Just basically bulking it up and stopping any, like the crabs ripping at the guts, and obviously because it's so soft it doesn't take a lot to take it off. And quite a bit on the bottom again, same on the top. And that is how I bait up the squid. It's a nice neat bait, loads of hook showing. Right, so I hope you found that video useful. So the 2 biggest things that I would recommend that really does change your hookup rate is having as much hook shown as possible. Like you'll see on all of them, there is loads of hook showing. Like I've seen people use them where the hook is really buried down deep and they've missed fish, and they've said, oh, the circle hooks are useless, they're no good, stick to pennels. when it's, in my eyes, it's a user error, I find, in a lot of situations. So yeah, having a lot of hooks showing is the biggest one out of all of them. And then the other one is being able to use as little elastic as possible. Obviously, don't get me wrong, sometimes you're going out and the crabs are ripping at your bait constantly, so you gotta use a lot of elastic to sort of, obviously, so your bait lasts a bit longer. So that's different, but generally speaking, if you do mummify your baits in elastic and they're really firm, you will find fish will pick it up and they'll drop it by the time you actually manage to set the hook. And that's about all I could really say, to be honest. And another thing is the elastic you use. I don't like heavy stuff at all. Like this is the Tronic stuff. This is the heavy one that out of that range, but it's not a heavy elastic. The other ones are very fine, which is great for your smaller baits. But you see some elastics on the market, it's like rope, it's no good. You can see it clearly on the bait and it's just really nasty stuff, it's horrible. So yeah, a finer elastic is definitely a really important thing to use. You can present your baits a lot better, they just sit a lot neater and nicer. So yeah, I hope that's been worth your time watching. And another one is, I've seen people use a circle hook as both hooks on a pennel, when in my eyes it's not really worth it, because it's important for a circle hook that the bait is below the hook. That's why it works so well. You'll see people when they're live baiting for bass or whatever, you got to make sure that as much of the hook is showing, so when the fish picks it up and they go to swallow it, it's just going to catch straight away in the corner. And another one, I've seen people where they use a J hook on the bottom and then a circle hook on the top. There's nothing wrong with it, you know, but most of the time they say 90% of my fish is hooked on the circle hook. So get rid of the J hook then, because it's pointless it being there really. If 90% of your fish are hooked on your circle, then J hook doesn't really serve much of a purpose. And again, it's the fish safety thing as well. You rarely get deeply hooked fish with circle hooks. I have had it in the past. It's not going to completely stop it, but it does help. So yeah, like I said, hopefully I've explained myself as best as possible. And yeah, hope you've enjoyed it and found it useful. If there's anything else you want to know or would like me to say, then let me know in the comments below. Or any other videos you want me to do, then drop in the comments and I'll get them done. But for now, that is a wrap. A squid wrap. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.